August 7th, 1942, 16,000 U.S. Marines are wading through chest-deep water toward a place most of them can barely pronounce, Guadalcanal. It's a steaming chunk of jungle in the Solomon Islands, and these men have one job that sounds simple on paper: capture an airfield being built by the Japanese. They manage it in about 36 hours, meeting surprisingly light resistance. The Japanese retreat into the jungle. Mission accomplished, right? Wrong. That's when the real nightmare begins. The captured airfield is unfinished. It's barely more than a cleared patch of dirt. And this isn't just any dirt. It's tropical soil that bakes under the equatorial sun one moment and gets hammered by monsoon rains the next. When it's dry, it's as hard as concrete. When it rains, it turns into something with the consistency of chocolate pudding. The Marines look at this strip and realize they're facing a problem that could get them all killed. Because here's the thing no one tells you about island warfare in the Pacific. You don't win by holding ground. You win by controlling the air above it. And you can't control the air without a functioning runway. The Japanese know exactly what they've lost. Within days, their bombers begin to pound Henderson Field, the name the Marines gave the airfield in honor of a pilot killed at Midway. But the real enemy isn't the bombs, it's the mud. After every downpour, the runway becomes unusable. Wildcat fighters and dauntless dive bombers, the only air cover the Marines have, start sinking into the ground. Mechanics watch in horror as landing gear struts disappear into the muck. One pilot tries to take off for an intercept mission, and his wheels dig 4-foot-deep trenches before his plane even moves forward. He never gets airborne. The Japanese bombers he was supposed to stop arrive unopposed 20 minutes later.
The math is brutal and simple. Without an all-weather runway, Guadalcanal will fall. If Guadalcanal falls, the entire Pacific offensive will be stalled for a year, maybe longer. In Washington, this problem lands on the desk of the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers. Desperate radio messages from the Pacific all say the same thing. We need a solution, and we needed it yesterday. The Corps of Engineers isn't starting from scratch. They have been wrestling with the soft ground runway problem since before Pearl Harbor, conducting tests at airfields from the swamps of Louisiana to the tundra of Alaska. But everything they've tried has failed in one way or another. And now they're watching those failures play out in real time 7,000 miles away in the Pacific. The first serious attempt came in early 1941 with something called square mesh track, a grid of welded steel bars resembling reinforced chain link fence made from rebar. The theory was sound: create a rigid framework to distribute weight over a wider area. They laid it down at Langley Field in Virginia, rolled a B-17 across it, and watched the mesh fold like tinfoil under the 30-ton bomber. Then came the Hessian mat experiments in the spring of 1941, inspired by the British experience in North Africa, where they used burlap soaked in asphalt for temporary roads. American engineers figured if it worked for trucks, why not for planes? They soaked thousands of yards of jute fabric in hot asphalt, laid it over soft ground at Wright Field in Ohio, and conducted landing tests with P-40 fighters. The 10th landing tore the fabric to shreds, and chunks of asphalt-soaked burlap jammed the landing gear mechanisms. The idea of using coral and gravel initially seemed more promising, but a tropical downpour turned the carefully compacted surface into a slurry. Worse, once coral gets wet, it's almost impossible to recompact. Pierced steel planking came closest to solving the problem, but under the equator's sun, the steel expanded, causing the plates to buckle and create a washboard surface that could shear off landing gear on a landing at 80 miles per hour. By the fall of 1941, the engineers were running out of ideas and time. Pearl Harbor changed everything. The Corps of Engineers issued an urgent contract request. We need a runway surface that can be installed in days, support aircraft up to 50,000 pounds, work in mud and on coral, and survive tropical conditions without warping. And yes, it needs to be light enough to ship across an ocean. Carnegie-Illinois Steel Corporation takes the contract. Their engineering team, instead of trying to mimic concrete, arrives at a brilliantly simple conclusion. Don't fight the mud, float on top of it.
Thus, the prototype is born. A steel plank 10 feet long, 15 inches wide, and 3/16 of an inch thick. Each plank weighs 66 pounds, heavy enough to be durable, but light enough for 2 men to handle without machinery. Rows of holes are punched through the entire surface to reduce weight, drain water, and provide grip. But the real genius is in the edges. One side has an upward curving hook, the other a corresponding slot. When 2 planks are laid side by side, the hook slides into the slot and locks under pressure, without bolts or welding. The connection is strong enough to support an aircraft, but flexible enough to allow the entire carpet to conform to uneven ground without breaking apart. The short ends connect with a simple overlap. Under pressure, this joint only tightens. There is some debate about the invention's name. Some sources credit lead engineer James Marston. Others, including the American Aviation Historical Society, claim the name Marston Mat comes from the town of Marston, North Carolina, where some of the first tests were conducted, with engineer Gerald G. Grulich being a key figure in the development. In any case, the soldiers and sailors who would lay these planks under fire would give them their own, simpler name, PSP, pierced steel planking, or, as one P-38 veteran recalled, grid mat. The physics behind its effectiveness is elegant. The problem isn't the total weight of an aircraft, but its concentration. Take the B-25 Mitchell bomber, for example. It weighs around 35,000 pounds. Contrary to some misconceptions, it didn't have a tail wheel. It was an aircraft with tricycle landing gear, 1 nose wheel and 2 main wheels. All that weight pressed down on the ground through these 3 points, creating immense pressure that soft soil couldn't handle. The Marston Mat solves this by distributing the load. When a wheel touches one plank, the interlocking system immediately transfers the force to the adjacent planks. The effect is cascading. By the time the pressure reaches the ground, it has been spread over an area of about 100 square feet. The ground beneath the mat experiences a load that even the poorest soil can easily bear. In March 1942, tests are conducted in the swamps of Louisiana. The mat flexes and ripples under a B-17, but it holds. The military immediately orders 60 million square feet. And so, on August 17, 1942, the first shipment arrives at Guadalcanal. Unloading it on the beach are the men of the Naval Construction Battalions, the famous Seabees. These were carpenters, steelworkers, and equipment operators who, just months earlier, were building bridges and highways across America. Now they are in a combat zone, under fire from Japanese fighters trying to assemble a runway from a material they've never seen before. The Seabees motto, "Can do," is put to the ultimate test. 66 pounds per plank isn't much until you're hauling them for hundreds of yards in 100-degree heat and 90% humidity. They develop a rhythm. 2 men carry a plank, a third guides it to align the locks. They quickly master the technique. Tilt the new plank, slide the hook under the slot of the one already in place, and drop it. The dull metallic click becomes the most satisfying sound they know. It means locked in place.
The work is done in frantic bursts between air raids. When a spotter plane is sighted, everyone runs for foxholes. After the bombing, they wait 10 minutes for unexploded ordnance to cook off, then get back to work. If a bomb hits a completed section, they simply unlock the damaged planks and replace them. A repair that would take days on a concrete runway takes less than an hour here. One veteran recalled that the mats had a drawback. Bomb shrapnel would create razor-sharp burrs on the edges of the holes, which would shred aircraft tires, but it was a price everyone was willing to pay. On August 20th, 3 days after the first shipment arrived, a 200-foot section is ready. It's enough for fighters. That same day, 19 Wildcats and 12 Dauntlesses land on it. The famed Cactus Air Force is born. Pilots describe the landing as touching down on a firm trampoline. The mat's flexibility was forgiving, absorbing some of the impact energy. However, engineers soon faced an unforeseen problem. One of the first P-38 fighters to land on a newly laid but unsecured mat created a startling effect. The air trapped under the flexible steel carpet billowed up behind the plane as it moved, forming a metallic balloon that rippled down the runway. The lesson was learned quickly. The mats had to be firmly staked to the ground at regular intervals. After that, everything worked perfectly. By September 5th, the 5,200-foot Henderson Field runway was complete. 19 days instead of 3 months. This was a turning point. The island-hopping strategy became feasible. February 1943, Russell Islands. A fighter strip is ready in 60 hours. August 1943, Munda Point. The Seabees lay mats under direct fire from snipers and machine guns. One construction battalion veteran described how they worked. They'd jump off their bulldozers, grab their rifles, shoot back, then get back behind the controls. 14 men were killed, but the runway was operational in 11 days. On Bougainville in November 1943, the technology was refined. Mats were pre-assembled into giant panels in Australia, transported on landing craft, and laid by cranes. A runway that would have taken 2 weeks was ready in 4 days. Production grew exponentially. In 1944, 60 million square feet of matting were produced annually. The Army used so much steel for them that it temporarily cut back on tank production. The war ended, and it seemed Marston Mats were obsolete. Thousands of tons were stockpiled across the Pacific, awaiting scrapping. But then came June 25, 1950, Korea. The mats were brought out of storage. They worked perfectly on frozen ground, flexing with it. Then came Vietnam, 1965. Some of the planks laid in Da Nang were the very same ones that had sat in the mud of Guadalcanal 20 years earlier.
But the most amazing part of this story began after the wars. Millions of these steel planks were left behind on Pacific Islands and spread across the world. They found a second life in the hands of ordinary people. A man who grew up in the Pacific in the 60s recalls his neighbors using Marston mats for fences. He didn't know what they were for decades until he remembered the distinctive round holes. Another saw them used as decking for homemade car trailers. In England, on reclaimed fields, they were used to create temporary access roads for vehicles. A house built in 1954 is still enclosed by a fence made of these timeless steel sections. They were even used as barriers on the U.S. southern border. There is one almost legendary story. In 1964, a family traveling in their new Dodge Dart got stuck in sand. The father's attempts to drive out only dug the wheels deeper. His two sons, instead of looking for branches, found a rusty piece of PSP in the bushes. They dug out the sand and placed the mat under the drive wheel so that the sharp edges of the punched holes would grip the tire's tread. The car backed out instantly. Those two boys grew up to be inventors, and that incident was their first lesson in engineering ingenuity. Even today, the Mat's legacy is alive. The modern U.S. Air Force uses AM-2 mats. They're made of aluminum, aren't perforated, and connect with pins, but the principle is the same. You can find original mats serving as footbridges, decking, and even decorative elements. And if you ever find yourself at Disneyland, in the Star Wars area, look down at the ground. Yes, those are Marston Mats, now part of a fantasy landscape. Wars are won by tanks, planes, and ships. But in reality, they are won by the unseen infrastructure. The ability to turn a worthless piece of mud into a functional military asset faster than your enemy thinks is possible, Marston Mats changed the fundamental equation of the war in the Pacific. They allowed the American advance to maintain its momentum, turning captured islands from liabilities into springboards for the next leap. Without them, the bombing campaigns against Japan from the Mariana Islands would have started not in late 1944, but in mid-1945, if not later, completely changing the war's endgame. The elegance of this solution lies in its simplicity. Planks that hook together, holes that drain water, steel that bends but doesn't break. The engineers at Carnegie-Illinois and the Army Corps of Engineers may have saved more lives and shortened the war more effectively than any single weapon system, not through destruction, but through construction. They learned how to turn mud into runways and hopelessness into opportunity. And within that simple, perforated sheet of steel lies the story of how, in any war, logistics is everything.